I want to thank you so much for making time out of your day to talk with me today.
No, you're welcome. Actually, over the years, I've made one or two good American friends from plays of mine that they've put on. So
wow.
It's always nice to talk. It's always nice to talk to people who are doing my stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've obviously really enjoyed it thus far, and it's been an inordinately large part of my life since the beginning of the year, because we started our rehearsals back in January, and then because of COVID, we had to shut everything down. But even then, during those couple of months, we were still virtually meeting through Zoom sessions such as this. So I feel very well acquainted, at least with Murdered to Death. And I really appreciate what you've done there. I told the other folks in my cast that we were going to be talking today, and they were excited about that as well.
Because originally, when was it going to go on originally?
It was going to be late April through May, if I remember correctly. It's weird. The first part of this year is all very fuzzy to me now. The days of all kind of...
the end of this year, and people will just we'll get to next year, and people will have forgotten about this year. It's just not really happening, is it?
No, not exactly. So I don't know. I know that you've spoken. I don't know how much you've spoken with our director Bethany, but she wanted to thank you for allowing us to live stream a videotaped performance, since we, of course, are not going to be opening up the theater space to live audiences at this point. But.
Yeah, I mean, I had an exchange, just a quick exchange of emails with her when she said, was it okay to do it? And I certainly didn't have a problem with that at all.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I've got some questions here for you just from, I was perusing your blog and checked out some of your other works. A couple of things that caught my attention from your bio there. You were a chartered civil engineer before becoming a full-time writer.
And that's right. Lots of people actually don't associate people who are engineers with anything to do with writing, on the basis that engineers aren't actually supposed to be able to even manage to speak, never mind write. So, it was a bit of a strange combination.
Now, was that different in your case? Was in your vocation, were you doing any writing, or that was just strictly to pay the bills, and then you found time to write in your own time?
It was pretty much like that. I mean, I think like lots of people, I kind of stumbled into my profession, which turned out to be civil engineering.
Right.
And really the theatre was kind of a hobby. And I kind of almost fell into the writing as well. So at one stage I thought, well, I'll just try writing and see how it goes. Basically, the theatre group that I was in, we were always hunting around for plays to perform. And obviously come across some very good plays, some other plays that you kind of think, well, perhaps that's not so good. And I rather foolishly thought, well, I'll give it a go. I'll try writing one and see if I can do it. And much to my surprise, it kind of worked out. So it started off as a hobby that grew bigger and bigger, and eventually led to me basically being able to give up the day job and stick to writing. Although, having given up the day job, I don't do very much writing. But
so what was that transition like into becoming a full-time writer or a full-time playwright?
As I say, I probably wrote far more when I was actually doing it as just as a part-time job, really. And since I decided I can now call myself a full-time writer, actually the amount of writing I've done has not been that great, to be honest. But I've enjoyed myself doing lots of other stuff.
But you can call yourself you can call yourself a writer, and
on the basis that I'm not doing anything else very useful, yes, I think I can.
Yeah, I think a lot of writers feel that way, that there's nothing useful that they can do.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you were part of a theater group or a theater troupe yourself. Are you an actor, or have you been?
I didn't actually get. I've been married twice. My first wife. One of the things that I can thank her for. Perhaps I haven't got that much I can thank her for, but one of the things I can thank her for was she was very interested in amateur theatre, and up until that stage, I'd not really been involved in it. So I kind of got involved just with the local theatre group, and I started helping out set building. Maybe working a bit backstage. Then I thought, well, I'll try acting. So I did some acting as well. And I thought, well, there must be something that I actually can do quite well in the theatre. So I'll try writing. So that's kind of how it took off.
Right.
So for a while I was doing some writing, but still continuing to act in the theatre group. In fact, the first time, believe it or not, Murder to Death, although it had a different title when I first wrote it, was actually the first play that I ever wrote. Since then, it got modified a few times, and it certainly wasn't the first one that was published, but it's certainly the first one that I wrote. And when our local group performed it, I also directed it, and we were a little bit short of men, so I also played the part of Constable Tompkins as well.
That's unusual.
It certainly kept me busy.
That's great. Well, so what were some of your influences as a playwright or as a comedy writer, being that Murder to Death is obviously a comedy, and just as a writer in general?
I mean, I must say that although the Inspector Pratt plays, there were 4 of them, and Murder to Death obviously was the first one, although those are the ones that commercially have done the best for me, I personally prefer some of the other comedies that I've written. And certainly one influence that I had when I started writing, I was very fond of the work of Alan Ayckbourn, and he was certainly a big influence. And also Willie Russell as well. I quite liked the things that Willie Russell did. Willie Russell was Blood Brothers. I'm sure you're perhaps familiar with that one.
Well, Willie Russell, I'm sorry, can you repeat the name of it?
Blood Brothers.
Blood Brothers.
Yeah, it started off as a play and then became a musical as well.
Okay, yes, I am familiar with that.
But certainly Alan Ayckbourn was kind of quite a big influence, I think. And he's another Yorkshireman as well.
Oh, okay, another Yorkshireman. Oh, that's good. So that actually reminds me, just from my American perspective, there's a lot of Britishness, a lot of class consciousness that is specifically British at the heart of Murder to Death. And I'm reminded specifically of shows that, that we've seen over here on this side of the pond, like Are You Being Served or Fawlty Towers.
Yeah.
I mean, were those also cultural touchstones in your mind as well?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, when you mention things like Are You Being Served, the first professional production that Murder to Death had, there were actually a couple of the cast members of Are You Being Served were in it.
Oh, yeah. I had a castmate who actually pointed that out to me. That's great.
But in the general, I guess the general style, I set out to write a spoof of Agatha Christie, really. So I think that's where all that, all the very stereotypical, I suppose, British 1920s, 1930s characters come out. And really, so they're spoofs of fairly typical Agatha Christie characters, apart from Inspector Pratt, of course, who is maybe slightly different.
Were you always keen on Agatha Christie mysteries?
And I do have to admit that I wasn't really, no. I have performed in a few of them, and I must admit I never particularly liked them that much, which is part of the reason I decided to write a spoof. One of the things that always grabbed me about them is that you have these quite convoluted plots.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly you find that the murderer or somebody very associated with it turns out to be a character that you've not actually met in the play, who suddenly appears out of nowhere. So there's a kind of a play on that in Murder to Death, of course, when Miss Maple comes up with her theory about the woman of East European descent, and she's, and that's really just a spoof on the Agatha Christie. Suddenly this character appears out of nowhere that we've not heard of before.
I do appreciate the Miss Marple or the Miss Maple character in your play as a nod to Miss Marple, who is addle-brained and completely way off, playing with our our perceptions of what that character is supposed to do. Yeah. One thing that really strikes me about the play, it's a parody, it's a spoof, and it works. I really enjoy it. I've read and performed in a lot of spoofs and lampoons that fall flat, that fail to engage the audience. A theory I have is that a lot of it comes down to having characters that no one can relate to or can emotionally involve themselves with. How do you think you manage to avoid the fate of unsuccessful parodies?
I think it was possibly pure luck. I don't know. I mean, certainly one thing I set out to do when I started writing it was basically I was working on the theory that it's a spoof. So, and it's the whodunit as well.
Yeah.
So, A, it's got to be funny, but B, it actually, to me, the whodunit part of it, the mystery part of it, actually had to be something that was workable.
Yeah.
I think sometimes spoofs might fall down on one or the other. They might actually have quite a nice plot, which works as a whodunit, but perhaps isn't quite so funny. Or we might get something that's funny, but the whodunit part perhaps doesn't quite work. So I really wanted to make sure that both elements worked well. But ultimately, in all my writing, I've never been particularly trained to write drama or anything like that. Ultimately, to me, I write what I think is funny or what works, and then other people can judge whether it's worth it or not. And fortunately for me, it seems to fit the mark. So certainly the Inspector Pratt plays, because they're being performed not just in America but all around the world, which is never fails to surprise me, to be honest.
That's another thing I'm sorry to interrupt you. Another thing that I wanted to ask you about, again, taking a look at your blog, your website, is clearly you've mounted this production and your other Pratt plays not only in the UK but in the U.S., here in Texas, of course, and then I think I read South Africa and some other places. How have you seen any of those productions in other countries?
Well, I mean, the main other countries are, as you say, the US, South Africa, New Zealand, and Australia. I get quite a lot of productions in Australia as well. I have actually had a couple of trips to the States and seen them. I've seen 2 professional productions in the States, and also it happened to coincide because it was at the same time I saw a professional production and a community theatre production on the same trip. The two professional productions I saw were both dinner theatre productions. One of them was it wasn't quite Louisville. It was across the Louisville.
Kentucky?
Yeah, it was actually just over the border. There's Louisville is twinned with
Tennessee.
Clarksville.
Oh, Clarksville, the city, of course.
And the other one that I saw was in Little Rock, Arkansas, at the dinner theatre there.
All southern U.S. cities.
Certainly, yeah. I've got I've got some friends up in the north in Wisconsin, and I saw a community theatre production there, and then travelled down to see the one in Little Rock, and it was actually quite funny because in the north of the US, people were saying, "Oh, you're going to the south, they're really quite strange down there," you know.
Of course.
And when I got down to the south, they were saying, "Oh, you come from the north, they're really quite strange up there, aren't they?"
Yeah. Yep, that's welcome to the U.S. Yeah, exactly.
And of course, my agent in the UK works for a company. It's now Joseph Weinberger Plays, but he's actually a Californian.
Oh, okay.
And to him, at one time, I told him I was going to the States and some of the central areas, and he said, "Well, I can't really understand it because there's the East Coast and the West Coast, but why would you want to sort of visit any of the places in between?" So I've got all kinds of perspectives from on the US. From
flyover country.
From various people, yeah.
That's what we call it.
Well, on the trips I've had there, on the second trip I had there, I think we drove through my wife went, we drove through about 12 or 13 states, I think.
Wow.
So we perhaps see more of the US than some of the people who live in the US. I don't know.
I'm quite sure. I mean, it's a big, vast, vast place. I mean, just where we live in Texas, it takes 10 hours in either direction just to leave the state line.
Yeah, I can imagine. I would certainly like to get over to towards that side of the US at some stage.
Well, we would love to have you. It's unfortunate we won't be able to have you in time to see us mount Murdered to Death. So when you have seen performances in the U.S. or other places of your place, particularly the Pratt plays, how do they differ from the ones that you see in the U.K.? And are there things that they get wrong?
That's a very interesting question. I wouldn't say that in terms of what people get right or what people get wrong, I wouldn't say that there's any difference between the UK and the USA. You know,
I ask because. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, whenever I go and see a performance of one of my plays, they're always a little bit different, which is the nice thing about seeing them because everybody has their own perspective, and the director will have a certain view on things, the actors will certainly have a view on things. So every time, it's a little bit different. And to me, that's the fun part of writing plays.
Interesting. Yeah, I ask because I can tell that it's written from a particular perspective. It's written from a very British perspective, and it's about mid-20th century class relations and that kind of thing that doesn't necessarily translate very well to here, for example.
One thing that's kind of surprised me about it being done so much in the US, and it gets done actually by quite a lot of high schools and colleges in the US. And one thing that surprises me is that I kind of thought that some of the humour wouldn't translate to the US particularly well. I can see how it would work in places like Australia and New Zealand, which have perhaps got a more recent, greater link with the UK. But the US sense of humour and kind of getting some of the stuff that are in the Pratt plays, I wasn't quite sure how that would work. I mean, I guess part of it works because of Agatha Christie.
Right.
Because I think most Americans would get the Agatha, know who Agatha Christie is and have probably seen some Agatha Christie films. And also, I kind of think that with the Inspector Pratt character, it's a little bit like Agatha Christie meets the Pink Panther.
Yes.
And there's certain elements of the comedy in the Pratt character. You could imagine Peter Sellers playing that part as, and it working very well.
Yeah.
So perhaps it's those two things. I think American audiences perhaps relate to the Agatha Christie type stuff, but can also kind of relate to the Pink Pan.
The Inspector Clouseau, Pink Panther
humor.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's interesting that you brought that up because I of course see a lot of Inspector Clouseau in Pratt, that bumbling. He's full of overweening self-confidence that's completely misguided. So there's a lot, and that's also a kind of character archetype that I think has become popular in the States here as well, with TV shows like the Office, or the American version of The Office, and I think it does strike a chord with people. What I thought was interesting about name checking Clouseau and Peter Sellers was, of course, you have this this character Peter, or Pierre, with putting on a fake French accent, and wouldn't you know, I go straight to YouTube to watch as much Peter Sellers Pink Panther as I could to help me get into the voice.
I do have, well, one feature of all the Inspector Pratt plays is that I never miss the opportunity to have a few comedy characters in there of other nationalities.
Yeah.
So in Murder to Death, although he's not actually French, he's the Frenchman. And in some of the other ones, I have an Italian and an Australian. And really, in some ways, I suppose it's the English thing of, aren't foreigners funny? But of course, in the Inspector Pratt plays, what we're really laughing at are the English characters, like Inspector Pratt, like Colonel Craddock. Those are the ones really that we're laughing at. Right.
Yeah, again, the overconfident buffoons.
Yes.
Yeah. I really enjoy that. So, well, let me ask you.
I hope you're enjoying playing the part of Pierre, though, because there's some really good things you can play around with that part.
Yeah, it has been a lot of fun, and we'll see what your perception is, because you will, of course, get to see the final product there. But it's been a lot of fun, and then I, near the end in Act 2, switch, drop the facade, and then become Peter, who I gave a Cockney.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah. I figured that was probably close to what you're intending. So after writing, you wrote Pratt as what ended up being a trilogy, correct?
It was a trilogy, and then I wrote a prequel. So it's as Inspector Pratt would say, it's a trilogy. It's a 4-play trilogy.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, there was a trilogy, and then I wrote a prequel, which actually was the last thing I wrote, and that's the one called Slayed to Death, and that goes back to the days when he was a police sergeant before he became an inspector.
Excellent. Well, you'll be hearing from us next season. We just may want to put that on.
Well, Slayed to Death is actually set at Christmas.
Oh.
And one of the reasons I did that was I thought, well, in America you don't have the traditions of pantomime and things like that. So I guess that people in the States are often looking for plays with a Christmas theme to put on at that kind of time of year. So it might be one that does well in the States.
Oh, yeah. I think that would be ideal. And so after your the Pratt trilogy, or I should say during that hiatus that you took between the third part and the fourth part of the so-called trilogy, you turned your attention to plays in a modern setting. I've seen some of the titles. I have to confess I haven't read or seen any of them yet. Do you have any favorites from those? And two-part question. And were there any particular topics that you wanted to explore with those modern-day plays?
I mean, in terms of modern day plays, it wasn't that I wrote the Pratt plays and then wrote the modern day plays. They kind of got interspersed, really. The modern day plays, there's no particular theme, but really they're more about the characters and the situation. So one of them is set on a caravan site. Another one is set at a golf club. The one at the golf club isn't about golf. It's about the characters. I don't know if you come across a play called, you possibly haven't because it probably wouldn't go well in the States, called Outside Edge, and it's about cricket. So that you probably immediately turn off at that point.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a well-known English-British play called Outside Edge, which again is set at a cricket match, but it's all about the characters rather than the game of cricket. And I kind of wanted to do something the same with golf, so it's set at a golf club, and there are obviously lots of aspects of golf in it, but it's about the characters, not the golf.
Are you a golfer yourself?
I wouldn't describe myself as good enough to actually call myself a golfer, but I have hacked around a few courses in my time.
Excellent.
But yeah, the other plays, there's no particular theme as such. I think I mentioned Alan Ayckbourn. I don't know if you've come across any Alan Ayckbourn plays. I mean, he's quite prolific. In the amount of stuff he's written, I mean, he's, I think, probably written about 60 or 70 plays now. And his is particularly his older ones are very much just about English, about British people, really. And so I guess my modern comedies are based on that kind of thing. They're just about everyday situations and everyday characters, really.
So does he, and I'm sorry, what was the name of that playwright again?
Alan Ayckbourn.
Alan Ayckbourn, okay. Now, does he take sort of a Noel Coward approach, or is it more everyday people?
Very much everyday people. I mean, he goes back to, I guess his first plays were put on in the 70s or something like that.
Oh, okay.
And basically, I think he's written at least one play per year ever since then.
Wow.
And I mean, his certainly, perhaps not so much in the US because maybe the humour doesn't translate in that way. But certainly, again, in places like New Zealand and Australia, if you mention the name Alan Ayckbourn, everybody would have done or know of his plays.
That's impressively prolific. Would that we could all be that prolific?
Do you do writing yourself?
Do I do acting? Is that what you asked?
Do you do any writing?
Do I do any writing? I do. I do some writing. I haven't written anything long form yet. I've written a couple of one acts, and I've written a lot of comedy sketches through a couple of the comedy schools / comedy theaters here, and I do write for just a couple of podcasts that I do in my spare time. I have one podcast that is completely devoted to the band Sparks, oddly enough, and then I have another one that I do, which will feature this interview. By the way, it's mostly an interview podcast, but then I also intersperse that with some sketches. So it's been a while since I've picked up the pen or typewriter and really, endeavored to do a full, 3-act or so play. But with all this time in front of me.
Yeah, I just wondered whether you've been, obviously in a community theatre, if you'd written anything for them.
That's a good question, and I haven't yet. I've actually haven't been a member of this repertory for very, very long, but there are several people who are members who have written some one acts, and I'm definitely looking to get involved with that. Hopefully next season. And thanks for lighting a fire under me.
Right, so they are quite open to producing things that members have written, which is great.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah, they've been it's a really supportive group of people to be involved with. Unfortunately, we are forced to leave our space at the end of July for budget reasons, for rent. This COVID-19 situation has definitely cut into our bottom line, and it's just a trying time for anyone, let alone people in the independent performing arts.
Yeah, I think it is. But as you say, particularly for theatre groups, both professional and community, I think everybody's struggling at the moment.
It's true. Well, I'm again I'm really thankful that our director Bethany and that the entire cast and the board decided that it would be worthwhile to mount Murdered to Death after all. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to feel really strange when it's over.
when is that actually going to happen? And how are you doing it? Are you doing it as a series of live performances that are streamed, or are you
yes. Yes and no. Mostly no. So what we are going to do is we are going to have a couple of cinematographers come in, and they're going to videotape us do a couple of live performances. I think right now we've just decided on 2 live performances, and then we will edit and splice together. I mentioned we'll have close-ups and different angles, so we can make it look as professional as we possibly can to kind of make up for the fact that there won't be an actual in-person live experience there. So we are gonna film it as such, and then edit it together as well as we can, and then we are going to upload it to YouTube, and we are going to we will still be selling tickets because we do have bills to pay, obviously, but then people will get a private link to view it on YouTube, and then they are free to go back and watch it later. So once we have all of that up and running, I or someone, or I or Bethany or someone else will definitely send you a link so you can watch it and give us your thoughts.
That's good. I mean, it kind of sounds exciting for you to be doing it that way. I mean, I guess the one thing that you lose is obviously the
intimacy.
Is the intimate and the audience reaction, which itself can kind of spur other things. But it's something different, and I wish you well with it.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, really looking forward to it, and it's been such a joy to work on. It's a hilarious play, and I really enjoy the pure.
Good.
And thank you so much for your time again, Peter.
When you actually come to do it, if you'll have seen that I've got a Facebook page, and if you like to. If the group would like to download any photos or even just a few sentences about the way that you did it, I'm sure people would be interested in seeing that. Just the fact that somebody has gone down that road, gone down and used that approach of streaming it in that way. I'm sure people would be interested in seeing that. So if somebody in your group has got the time just to spend a few minutes and post something on my Facebook page, I'd certainly very much appreciate it.
Oh, I would love to do that. I definitely will. So this is a Facebook, is this your Facebook, Peter Gordon Facebook page, or?
Yeah, it is. If you go onto my website, there is a link to the Facebook page on there.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I guarantee you, Peter, I will definitely be availing myself of that to share our experience.
It's a slightly different perspective on the way things have been done in the past. Yeah,
definitely. It's a learning experience for all of us, but we're entering that brave new world. We're looking forward to it very much.
When do you think you're going to be doing it?
We are the 18th and the 19th of this month is when we'll have the camera crew in. And our goal is to have it available for streaming a week after that. So it will be around the end of June.
Yeah.
And
that sounds good.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to let you know all about it.
Well, please pass on my very best regards and very best wishes to everybody over there that's involved in it. Above all else, make sure that you all stay nice and safe, and that we all get out of this thing at the other end in one piece.
I do appreciate that very much, Peter, and you as well. You and yours, and you have a wonderful day.
That's great. Really good to talk to you.
You too, Peter.